Yeah, it's almost 100 million now raised between the two companies, which is mind blowing to me. How much money we've spent. Yeah. In Oregon, there's only been about 4,000, 5,000 patient interactions with psychedelics in the regulated space. And as we know, especially coming out of the pandemic and especially in places with war and other sorts of trauma like that, mental health is an increasingly huge problem. If I was creating a company in a totally different industry, I'd probably have a lot more convincing to do to investors to get them to trust me. In the early stage, in the first rounds a company does, pre-seed, seed round, it's mostly about the founder and the story behind the founder and why they're doing it. Subsequent rounds is more about the business and the economics of the business. And so that's really why we were able to raise this initial round.
Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to Default Global. Today I'm really excited to have Niko Skievaski with us. Niko is the co-founder and CEO of Althea, a company that is pushing the boundaries of mental health with psychedelics. Before that, he co-founded Redox, which is now processing over 30 million passion records every day. Niko led Redox through a 45 million Series C round. And now with Althea, he's already raised 1.5 million in seed funding. So Nika, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to share.
Sure. And before we jump in, anything you would like to add to that introduction?
No, I think you hit it all. Yeah, I haven't really been very public with the new company yet, so excited to kind of share more about it. But yeah, would love to just share any lessons learned along the journey of. Yeah, it's almost 100 million now raised between the two companies, which is mind blowing to me. How much money we've spent. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, let's start with that. Let's start with your new company. Let me see if I got this right. So you're trying to make psychedelic treatments for mental health kind of easier and safer to use, right? And you're doing that with software that helps manage and track the therapies, right?
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. And really what's going on that makes that possible is that in the United States, we have 2 states now who have legalized the use of psychedelic therapy for people who are seeking treatments. And that's Colorado, where I am, and then Oregon, where my co-founder is. And so we are working with the state governments, we're working with the regulators to actually make sure that we're tracking the right information to understand the impact of the program, not only on the mental health of the people that are actually participating in it, but on the wider public health efforts within those areas. And we're hoping that by doing that, the insights that we can gain from these programs, we can actually push policy and drug discovery and medicine forward across not only these states, but across the country and the world.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this could really help a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues, right? Which is like, yeah, amazing what you guys are doing there. But at the same time, Althea is still like a commercial project, right? So commercial company. So while the human side of this problem is clear, right? How big is it from market perspective? What do the numbers look like in terms of this potential here that we have?
Yeah. It's funny because most of the time when you raise money, you talk about the total available market and how big it is and all of that. Really, the regulated psychedelic market in the United States is very, very small. We're talking 2 states. Colorado's not even live yet, so Colorado will go live in 2025. And in Oregon, there's only been about 4,000, 5,000 patient interactions with psychedelics in the regulated space. And so we're talking about a very small market. And so if we look at the market from that perspective, the business I'm starting isn't really investable. But the bet that we're making is that the market's going to grow and that psychedelics are going to have a big impact in mental health. And as we know, especially coming out of the pandemic and especially in places with war and other sorts of trauma like that, mental health is an increasingly huge problem. People with serious mental health illness, they're not productive in the world. It's a huge problem, and psychedelics is really a really amazing bright light in the space. The psychiatry specialty in medicine really hasn't seen much innovation since antidepressive drugs that came out in the 50s and 60s with SSRIs and SNRIs. And what we're seeing with psychedelics in clinical trials right now is that they are far more effective. And they don't have to be taken every day. It's like a one-time thing, and it can sort of rewire your brain. And the results that we're seeing is that people are seeing, being able to really have that one experience and actually not have symptoms of PTSD anymore, or of treatment-resistant depression, or anxiety, or some of these other serious mental illnesses. So it's not a very big market, but we're hoping that it grows, and we're hoping that by building real-world evidence, we can actually help it grow.
Yeah, it was a huge potential, to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So, and you've already raised 1.5 million, right, in seed funding, which is exciting. Could you maybe share a bit about where things are now? Maybe some key milestones you've hit, maybe your current team size, or any like a partnership you're working on, anything like that.
Yeah. So it was interesting. I wasn't actually setting out to start this company and raise money, but I started talking with investors in the pharmaceutical space to learn more about psychedelics and what they were thinking, where the opportunities were. And through those interactions, I got connected with the University of Colorado Department of Psychiatry. And we started looking at what's going on with the regulatory space together, and talking to regulators, and that's where the idea of this business came from. So we co-founded it with the Department of Psychiatry, and then the investors we were talking to said, "Well, if you're going to do that, we'll put money into it." And so it kind of unfolded in that way, that the relationships that we built, the learning that we had over the past year or so, turned into the funding round. So I didn't make a deck for it. I didn't make like a pitch and go out and raise money. It was really just putting together a syndicate of investors based on the relationships that we had built over the time that we learned about this space. I brought in two co-founders who I have worked with in the past, who I know and trust. And then after we raised the round, we hired a developer who I've worked with, an amazing software developer. And I think with this team of four, we're actually going to be able to bring our product to market and really hit the milestones we need in the next year or 2 years, which is about the runway that we raised money for, to be able to raise more money. And so specifically, we're really looking for market penetration. As I mentioned, the market's really small, which means that I can actually go out and visit every one of the potential customers and users, and I'm hoping that we can get the vast majority of them to utilize the software. And in doing so, it'll open up opportunities for us to learn a lot from the experiences that people are having in Colorado and Oregon, and hopefully, as other states, California, Massachusetts are looking like they're coming online soon. We'll be able to be involved in those programs as they get going. So that's what I think will give us the evidence we need to go out and raise the next round. Is seeing some movement on the regulatory side.
Okay, and it was such a unique space, like psychedelics, mental health, right? I imagine the challenges are different compared to what you faced at Redox, right? With Redox, you've been through like quite a few fundraising rounds. Like the last one was 45 million Series C, right? And like it was different from what you have now, with 1.5 million seed round at Althea. So I'm curious, how does the experience compare? Like Althea is like a newer, right, more experimental space, like psychedelics again. So has the fundraising process felt different this time around? I mean, you mentioned this, that it was quite different, but still, maybe you can talk more about this.
Yeah, well, so Redox is a healthcare infrastructure company, and really the point of the company was to help modernize the healthcare infrastructure in the United States, and really bring it from on-premise software into the cloud, and moving data into the cloud. And so it was a very, very known space and known problem and known players in it. And so our fundraising process with Redox was really we were painting a story as to why we were the team that could actually solve the problem and why our strategy was the right way to solve the problem. And in talking with investors, the investors we talked to were studying this problem and studying the space, and so they knew very well what the challenges were and what the opportunity was. And so the story that we had to paint was that we are the ones that are actually going to be able to do it. And then in later rounds, obviously showing that we are the ones that are doing it. We're the ones capturing network effects and actually accomplishing that goal, which is such a different story than what we're facing in the psychedelics world. In that, in this space, I don't know who my customers are. I don't know how we're going to generate revenue. I don't know if software is actually even necessary in psychedelics. But I hope that by using software in this space, by collecting data to create real world evidence, that we're going to make an impact in it. And so it's a much more elusive problem. And fundraising in it, I really feel like the investors that I brought on board for Althea, they're what I have guaranteed to them is that we're going to learn a lot. And they're okay with that. They're the conversations we have around this is that, this is a huge risk. We have no idea what the business might look like a year from now or 2 years from now. But what we are going to know is a whole lot more about psychedelics and where the opportunities are in the space and how big it's going to be as they unfold. So I think it's much more of a learning experiment with this company, and with a bet that hopefully me and my team are going to be able to figure out a business model that can sustain this business in the long term. But it's much more of a search. Whereas with Redox, it was more execution, just making it happen, getting people on board with what we were doing.
Okay, and and speaking about your background, you've been involved in the healthcare tech space for years, right? Like you mentioned with Redox, previously Epic, right? And now Althea. So that's a lot of experience in one area, right? I mean, like one industry, not maybe area, but industry. Do you feel like it is easier? Maybe it was easier for you to raise funds when you've been like focused on one niche for so long, maybe one industry for so long. Do we see venture capital firms trust you more because of that track record?
Yeah. So I would say that the focus on the industry is certainly helpful, because they trust that I know what I'm doing when I'm making software in this space. And there's specific things to healthcare, HIPAA compliance, security, the way that we do that sort of stuff, working within a clinical setting like that is unique. But that stuff can be learned. And I think where probably more of the confidence that the investors got was that I have done this before. I founded a prior company and we took it through Series D, and it's on its way to going public. And so I think that it was more about their confidence in my ability as an entrepreneur than it was specifically in my experience as a health tech entrepreneur. So I think both of those things were certainly helpful, but it was maybe like 60% entrepreneur and 40% health tech. Because if I was doing a company, if I was creating a company in a totally different industry, I'd probably have a lot more convincing to do to investors to get them to trust me. Yeah.
Okay, so trust is the number one thing, right? Building that trust with investors over time is so valuable, right?
Yeah. Well, and in the early stage, in the first rounds a company does, pre-seed, seed round, it's mostly about the founder and the story behind the founder and why they're doing it. And then subsequent rounds is more about the business and the economics of the business. And so that's really why we were able to raise this initial round.
And you've seen the early stage fundraising landscape evolve since Redox first raised capital, right? So, what do you think are some of the biggest changes since those days, in terms of investors, in terms of this field?
Yeah, that it's a hard question because whenever you look at a market, right, you're looking through your lens of where you are within your company at that specific time. And so I think it's hard to have that global view and understand what the differences are. For me, my focus has always been on how do I make sure I know my market really well? I know who my customers are, all of the players in the ecosystem, and where my company fits into that and where value is added. And then if I know that, and if I understand where traction is going to come from, and if I can generate traction, then regardless of what's happening in the investment environment, I should be able to find investors that are willing to bet on me. And yeah, I understand that in some macroeconomic environments, you're going to be able to find more investors to bet on you, but you still need to fundamentally answer those questions. And so, my job as an entrepreneur, I really see it as not understanding. My job is not to dig into the financial markets and understand how that's going to affect my fundraising story. My job is to make my fundraising story as compelling as possible, so that regardless of what's going on in those financial markets, I'll be able to have success. Valuations are and as I get more real about the fundraise, I start to see, like, what are the valuations I'm being offered, and that's some reflection of that macroeconomic environment, but it's also just a reflection of my story and the traction I have, and it's probably more a reflection of that than what's going on within the macro world. So that's kind of how I think of it, which is a total cop-out answer to say, like, I don't know. But it's also like, that's not really what I try to focus on.
Got
And
it.
I often see, I mentor a lot of startups. I mentor for Techstars and work with a lot of founders. And I, I, I don't want to go so far as to say that looking at the macroeconomic environment is kind of an excuse, but sometimes it is. It's saying like, it's so hard right now because there's not a lot of investors looking at our space, or there's people are not as open to writing checks. And yeah, that might be true, but what that means is that you just have to work harder. You need more traction. You need to be willing to give up more equity, or have worse valuations. But all of those things are within your control as a founder, and what you can. Those are things you can do to, to account for that market. And so, what's going on in the market is what's going on, and we just have to respond to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, totally agree with that. So you've been a strong believer in remote work. I guess you still believe in that, right? So you even had this podcast about remote work, and now you've building Althea with that same mindset, right? Mm-hmm. So do you feel like being remote has helped you in building Althea and your previous companies, or has it been kind of a challenge nowadays when it comes to fundraising specifically? Do you think that any like a pushback from from VC markets, from VC firms who still prefer like a traditional office setup?
I think that before the pandemic, we had to do a lot more explaining. So when we started Redox in 2014, we were fully remote, and we had to explain why that made sense. But nowadays, I think it's kind of standard to be remote. It just allows you to have more of a work-life balance, because everyone knows starting a company is hard. There's a ton of sacrifice. And if you're also sacrificing having to commute to an office to spend that time literally away from home and from family, then it just adds so much more to that. And so my approach to remote has always been hire people that don't need to be managed, that don't need to be micromanaged, because I can't spend my time teaching someone how to respond to an email or how to show up to a meeting on time or things like that. Which means that in a remote culture, we had to hire more senior people who understood fundamentally the purpose of the business and what their role in it was. And those are the types of people you don't need to manage, and don't need to worry about, it's 8:30. Where are they? How come they're not working? How come they're not on Slack? It's like, no, they're going to get their job done. And, it's probably going to be done faster and at a higher quality than I could even imagine. And I think that's one of the main restrictions in remote work, is that it's hard to hire junior people, because you can't have as much oversight. You have to be able to trust people more. Even though, we are remote now, and in my last company, we had 300 employees fully remote. I think coming together in person is still really important. Fully remote is really challenging because it's hard to get to know someone for real, like just by looking at them through a little box on your screen. So we had always invested money in bringing the team together at least once a quarter. The full team at Redox, it was every 6 months, but we'd come together and with the 300 people, it was like throwing a little conference every 6 months. But right now, with 4 people on the team, we literally just fly into one city. We co-work together. We sit at each other's elbows. We work. We understand more. How what are things that annoy each other. What are things that really get someone fired up. We eat meals together, and then we might do a little bit of facilitated company building style activities, right, where we're focused on strategy or culture or things like that. The way I think about that is you're filling up the trust bank, and then when you go remote again and you ask someone to do something, or you might say something the wrong way in a meeting, you're sort of like drawing down from that trust bank, and then the next quarter you got to fill it up again. And so that's always how I look at it: is you come together, you fill up the trust bank, and then you work remotely, you get the job done, and sort of draw down on that bank until you need to do it again.
So even with this tough market, you don't think that remote mode is an issue for the majority of those venture capital firms?
No. I think if you're talking to a VC firm that wants your team to be in person, well, I would have a concern with taking money from them, because I would think that they probably think they need to manage me more, because an in-person team, in my mind, like if I made people come into the office, that means as a manager, I'm kind of a controlling, command control style manager. Like I want to be able to look over your shoulder, or I don't know, that might be a little harsh, but if my investor's saying, I want you in person and I want to be able to pop into your office, and I'd be like, oh, what sort of investor are you? Like, are you going to be like my adult supervision here? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And granted, I'm talking about software. Like we're in the software space. There's certainly companies that being in person makes a lot more sense. One of our investors primarily invests in early stage pharma, and so they're literally in a wet lab, like scientists doing experiments, and like obviously you got to be in person for that. So things like that, that makes sense. Or in a world where you have to have more junior people, like if your business has a call center or something like that, where you might need some more oversight, or you might be hiring people who are more junior for whatever reason. Like I think those environments might make sense to be more in person. But
got it. So, and probably my last question, you touched this a bit, but still, what would be your biggest piece of advice for founders who are currently trying to raise their money, maybe seed round with this current climate?
Yeah. So there's this kind of feeling that I've observed in working with founders. And it's such an elusive feeling, and it shows up differently, but I guess the way that I would summarize it is it's like winning energy versus not winning energy. And I can feel it when I talk to a founder, when I talk to their teams. Like it just feels like momentum. It feels like progress. It feels exciting. It feels fun. Those are the types of companies that are able to raise money. And I've seen so many founders who they haven't found that in their company. And it might be because, of their team and their other co-founders. It might be because of the market they're trying to get into, their ability to get traction, but they haven't found that feeling. And they also haven't been able to find funding. And so they sort of stay in it longer than they should is kind of my advice, is like, if you haven't found that and it's been 6 months, it's been a year, and you've been grinding and working your butt off and, trying to get traction, trying to raise money, and it's not working, I think it's okay to let it go, and move on. Because what we're doing as founders is we're learning very, very fast. And that skill of learning and understanding what's going on in the market, you can apply to a different company. And so I would just say, like, don't sacrifice too much over your startup. It takes a lot of sacrifice, but it shouldn't be as hard as I think some founders make it. And if it feels really hard for a really long time, like, give yourself a break, take some time off, either shut down the company or move on, get a job for a little while, take it easy, and then start gathering seeds again, figure out what the next thing is, and then go back at it. I'm not saying give up on startups, but I'm saying it might be too hard. And I'm just, it breaks my heart when I see a founder who's been in it for 2 years, hasn't taken a paycheck, they're mortgaged their house, they're really putting their life on the line for this company.
Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, it shouldn't be that hard. And when it's working, it's not that hard. When it's working, it's fun. It feels like progress. It feels like rolling downhill. And if you're pushing it up a hill, then that's a sign that maybe it's not the right product, maybe it's not the right market, maybe it's not the right time to be doing that project.
But maybe it's just a part of your journey.
It could be, yeah. And there's a million examples of people who pushed through that pain and have come out the other side, actually being successful. So I don't know. It's just, from my perspective, though, it's like, life's short. Like, don't spend years struggling.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Thank you. Thank you very much, Niko. It's been awesome having you on the show. Thank you for sharing your fundraising journey from Redox to Althea. I mean, I think we have covered like some really valuable ground today. Well, thank you very much for this.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun.